The cabin jolted so violently that overhead bins rattled. Wine sloshed dangerously close to spilling, and a collective gasp rose from the passengers as the lights flickered. Ryan Carter, gripping the armrest with knuckles white, felt Lily press against him, her small body trembling as the plane shuddered again. He glanced at the seatbelt sign, now blinking in frantic orange, and then at the flight attendant struggling to steady the service card in the aisle. Every instinct in him screamed brace, but he steadied his daughter instead, offering a whispered promise that everything would be all right. In that heartbeat, he realized this was no ordinary turbulence, and he wasn't an ordinary passenger. If you've ever wondered how far a parent will go for their child, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Share where you're watching from, and let us know what you'd do in row 17B when everything goes wrong. Now, buckle up for part 1. Ryan Carter settled into seat 17B with a weary sigh. Lily curled against his side, her sketchbook balanced on her lap. She drew tiny airplanes mid-flight, breathing life into each whimsical doodle. Her pencil strokes both a comfort and a reminder of why they were on this red-eye. A cheaper fare meant she could see the specialist in Greensboro first thing tomorrow morning. Across the aisle in 17C Victoria, Blake stared out the window without seeing anything beyond the inky night sky. She'd booked her ticket under a pseudonym to avoid the buzz of corporate fallout after her company's drone navigation scandal, but fate had other ideas. Ryan's jeans were worn thin at the knees, his hands rough from years of wrenching engines and fixing broken machinery. His hoodie bore the faded insignia of the Air National Guard, a chapter he'd closed when Lily was born, swapping flight suits for late-night rideshare shifts to make ends meet. Now, Alice, his granddaughter's name. No, his daughter's name? Lily. Lily's quiet voice brought him back. Daddy? Do you think the sky listens? She asked, tilting her head so that her goggles slipped, revealing eyes too wise for her 6 years. He chuckled softly. I think it hears when someone cares enough to shout. She smiled and returned to her crayons, oblivious to the executive beside them. Victoria's posture betrayed her poised arms, folded gaze guarded. She watched Ryan help Lily tuck her sketchbook away before extracting a small tattered bear from her backpack, one-eared, mismatched button eyes, and offering it to her father with a trust he didn't believe he deserved. A flight attendant's cart clanked past as Ryan nodded in apology, stepping aside to let her through. Lily reached out in gratitude, her tiny voice carrying across the aisle. Thank you, mister. Victoria's eyebrows lifted ever so slightly at the sweetness in Lily's tone. Ryan caught her eye and shrugged. No words needed. Soon after takeoff, everything settled into the hum of cruising altitude. Lily closed her eyes, lulled by the engine's steady drone. Ryan watched her chest tightening with protective love. Across the aisle, Victoria unfolded her tablet, but didn't touch it. Instead, she studied the father-daughter duo as though reading a book she couldn't put down, impatient to save herself, yes, but mesmerized by their quiet resilience. Midway through the flight, Lily awoke with a start, her tiny hand pressed against her chest. Daddy, my heart's racing. Ryan tapped the medical alert device clipped to her wrist. Just a scaring dream, sweetheart. I'm right here. He stroked her hair, and the world beyond melted away. No scandal, no ruined company, no guilt or regret. Just a man and his daughter suspended miles above the earth. Victoria glanced once more at her watch, then at the aisle, where Ryan cradled Lily's trembling form. She realized she had never seen such vulnerability in a person who did not demand it or expect pity. In that moment, her steel-edged reserve softened. The cabin lights dimmed for the overnight cruise. Ryan whispered a lullaby Lily had learned from her mother, a melody he feared he'd forgotten. Lily drifted back to sleep, her breath evening out. Victoria hinged slightly in her seat, curiosity overcoming her caution. She leaned in and offered a soft, "Good night, Lily," as if the child were her own niece. Ryan met her gaze with a nod of thanks that felt more profound than any apology. Minutes later, as the plane settled into darkness, Victoria tapped Ryan's shoulder. He turned surprised. She offered a faint smile and a single word, "Thanks." He blinked, but said nothing. The silence spoke volumes. Tonight, among a dozen rows of strangers, 2 lives intersected in row 17. Ryan, the single dad who'd left the sky behind, and Victoria the CEO running from her own failures. Neither knew how this journey would end, but both felt the faint stirrings of hope, born from an unexpected bond cradled between the hush of engines and the vulnerable heartbeat of a daughter who believed in the magic of flight. No one in 17B or 17C could guess that this was only the beginning of a story that would haunt headlines and redefine heroism at 30,000 feet, one turbulent night away from disaster. They would discover that sometimes the greatest rescues happen when you least expect them. Ryan Carter's knuckles went white against the armrest as the first clunk reverberated through the cabin, an ominous metallic echo that didn't match the steady thrum of the engines. The lights overhead flickered once, then again like a warning light on a dashboard about to go dark. He felt Lily's small hand clamp around his forearm, her fingers cold and trembling against his skin. Across the aisle, Victoria Blake stiffened in her seat, her tablet forgotten in her lap, her executive composure dissolving in the face of uncertainty. Around them, most passengers merely blinked at the minor disturbance, exchanging half-interested glances or stretching lazily as though they'd been jarred awake from a long nap. A woman in row 15 yawned and resumed reading her paperback. A teen in 19G tugged at his earbuds and sighed. To everyone else, it was just another bump in the night, a fleeting hiccup on the long journey from Denver to Greensboro. But for Ryan, the vibration was a gut punch of recognition. His years flying C-130s in the Guard had taught him that machines don't hiccup, they warn. He glanced down at Lily, nestled against him beneath the flickering light, her eyes wide and frightened in the half-dark. "Daddy?" she whispered, voice quavering. "What was that?" He swallowed, forcing calm into his voice. "Probably just the landing gear retracting a bit," he said, though he knew it didn't sound convincing. He pressed a reassuring kiss to her forehead and squeezed her hand. Nothing to worry about. But no sooner had he spoken than the cabin lurched again, a sharper jolt like the fuselage itself was protesting. Victoria's head shot up. Her eyes, sharp and alert, darted toward the flight attendant station. "What was that?" she asked, voice hushed but urgent. The attendant was crouched behind the service cart, writing cups and napkins, her crisp uniform a stark contrast to the chaos. He said it was just a minor mechanical issue, a passenger near Victoria mumbled, as if repeating a mantra to stave off panic. Ryan didn't trust mantras. He had been 32,000 feet over hostile territory when a single clunk meant the world was about to go very wrong. Every training scenario, every sleepless simulation came rushing back. He had a split second to decide: be a frightened dad, or be the man who had once steered transports through flak and fire. He chose neither panic nor passivity. He straightened in his seat, turning slightly so that Lily faced him in profile. Her eyes were wet with fear. "Lily?" He murmured, voice low and steady. "Look at me." She met his gaze, tiny pupils dilated in the dim. "I need you to listen closely. Everything's going to be okay, but I need you to stay still and keep breathing with me, all right?" A single nod. Then her small chest rose and fell in rhythm with his own. He drew in a controlled breath, 2 seconds, and 4 seconds out, and she mirrored him. Together they breathed through the tremor, building a fragile calm in the eye of a mechanical storm. Victoria watched this father and daughter ritual with growing respect. She'd booked the flight to escape scrutiny, to hide in plain sight. Tonight she found herself exposed by circumstance, not choice. Her corporate shield offered no protection here. She glanced at Ryan's scarred temple, the mark of a life spent storming through crises, and felt a flicker of gratitude for his hidden strength. Then came the third clunk, louder, more insistent, a rolling beat that vibrated straight through the floor panels. Overhead bins rattled. An olive-skinned baby behind them bawled. The flight attendant barked, "Please return to your seats." Her calm facade trembled in her voice, and Ryan knew it was time to act. He stood careful to keep Lily close against his side, wrapping one arm around her while steadying himself against the seatback. Nearby heads swiveled, curiosity, annoyance, fear, when they recognized the lone man moving against the tide of passengers trying to remain seated. Victoria caught his eye again, and this time she spoke without words, an offer of unsolicited loyalty. He gave her a brief, weary nod, then turned toward the front. The cockpit door glowed with the occupied sign, a barrier between the unknown and the crisis at hand. A flight attendant tried to block his path. "Sir, please," I served, Ryan. said quietly, cutting off her protest with a single word heavy with implication. He didn't wait for her to react. He slipped past and reached the sturdy cockpit door, the source of every decision that would follow. He pressed his palm to the reinforced panel and spoke in a clear, commanding tone. Flight 729, this is Ryan Carter. I was instructed to come forward if we had mechanical issues. Cockpit entry, please. His military cadences tripped over the hush of chanting prayers in the cabin. Moments later, the door unlatched from within. Ryan stepped in. The cockpit was in semi-darkness, displays flickering on half power. The captain's head lolled forward, mouth slack against the mic, while the first officer sat rigidly unmoving. Ryan's breath caught at the tableau. No smoke, no fire, but an unmistakable pall of emergency. Drawing deep on instincts he'd thought long buried, he knelt beside the slumped captain. Captain Rodriguez. His voice was steady, urgent. The captain's eyes fluttered clarity, returning for a blink. An issue, he rasped. Power. Hydraulics. Both The console hiccuped and went dark, sensor sputtering. Ryan rose, moving like someone half-trained in flight dynamics and half-miracle. He smashed a palm onto the backup battery switch. Panels blinked on. Gauges danced. A swirl of data returned altitude, airspeed, fuel pressure. All dying. He felt his heart rate spike, matching Lily's earlier tremor, but he kept outward calm. He faced Sandra Martinez, the nearest flight attendant, who had followed him in. Lock this door, he ordered. She slid the latch, eyes wide. I need you to secure the cabin seatbelts tightened, nothing loose. Her nod was immediate. Yes, sir. Right away. Ryan pivoted back to the controls, his gaze flicking between shutdown warnings and the artificial horizon. He tapped the comm switch. Greensboro approach flight 729. We've lost one engine, no response on the other. Co-pilot and captain incapacitated. Request vectors. Request permission to override autopilot. Silence. Upstairs, the flight attendant at the service station called back over the loudspeaker, Flight 729 to ATC, please advise. Ryan cursed under his breath. Protocol was drowning in bureaucracy. Victory vanished in the hush of static. Ryan remembered that Lily was counting on him, that Victoria, the stranger whose hands had stayed folded in her lap, was watching him redefine heroism. He remembered why he'd loved flying, the responsibility, the calm amid chaos, the fragile trust between a pilot and everyone in the cabin. He took a breath and keyed the mic again. His voice was taut, soft enough to carry compassion. Flight 729. I'm taking manual control. Guidance or not. I'm bringing this aircraft down. In the cabin, Victoria heard his voice crackle through the speakers. She clasped Lily's hand and mouthed, He'll be fine. Lily squeezed back a small, brave gesture that brought tears to Victoria's eyes. Ryan reached for the yoke. His grip was firm but not tense, as if greeting an old friend after years apart. He slid into the captain's seat, his uniform a patchwork of grease stains and duty ribbons, and exhaled a long, steady breath. Let's see what we've got, he whispered to himself. Behind him, the cabin lights dimmed further as the plane continued its nocturnal cruise. But in that cockpit, clarity shone bright. A man reborn at 30,000 feet, wielding nothing but instinct, skill, and a father's fierce love for the daughter clinging to his side. And in that moment, every passenger, strangers though they were, found a new reason to believe. The sudden shudder felt different, more precise than the earlier bumps, a calculated jolt that rippled along the cabin floor. Then came the click, a single hollow metallic note that echoed ominously through the fuselage. The right engine's hum died in an instant, sucked into a private vacuum that swallowed every other sound. A beat later, half the overhead lights dimmed until the cabin was half in shadow, half in flickering glow. In that eerie hush, the usual drone of talk and wheels on tarmac vanished, replaced by the frantic sigh of people realizing something was very wrong. Lily's small gasp cut through the silence. Ryan Carter's heart hit his throat as he felt her press against him. He reached instinctively for the armrest, then dropped his hand to her shoulder, squeezing it. Hold on, he murmured, voice low but firm. The sudden stillness felt like the plane itself had caught its breath, uncertain whether to continue or join the void. All at once, panic rippled outward. A woman in 18D lurched forward, crying out as her coffee mug toppled, liquid pooling at her feet. A man 2 rows back shouted, "What the—" The overhead bins rattled like dying thunderclouds, and oxygen masks tumbled from their compartments, swinging uselessly on their cords. Neon green and yellow, they bobbed in the half-light, mocking safety. Flight attendant Mia Torres moved like a steel arrow through the chaos. She had spent years steering strangers through drills and delays. This was no simulation. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her uniform crisp despite the dim emergency lighting. She wove down the aisle, one hand pressing against seats for balance, the other clutched in front of her as she called out over the rising cacophony. Row 17, clear the aisle, cockpit. Now passengers who had moments before been reaching for baggage or soft drinks froze in place as though Mia's voice sliced through panic and replaced it with urgency. In 17C, Victoria Blake sat upright, every muscle in her posture snapping to attention. Her silk blouse was rumpled, but beneath her fear, her eyes were clear and focused, tracking Mia's every move. Across from her, Ryan stood at attention, the remnants of his military bearing flowing back into his frame. He caught Victoria's eye for a split second, a flash of shared understanding that this was no longer a red-eye comfort flight. This was a moment carved from necessity, demanding instinct and resolve. Without a word, he nodded and rose. Lily didn't resist. She slipped into his arms, clutching her stuffed bear against his chest. "Daddy?" She trembled. He planted a kiss on the top of her head. "I'm right here, sweetheart," he assured her, then laid her gently across his lap as he pivoted into the aisle. The plane pitched again, a slow drop that twisted ribs and rattled tray tables. Ryan braced one hand against the seat back, the other securing Lily. He caught a glimpse of the captain's door at the front, its small indicator light blinking red with the word occupied. He knew that Mia needed him up front. He needed to see what had failed, how deep the damage went. Victoria rose behind him, sliding past seated passengers without hesitation. Her tablet clattered to the floor, forgotten, as she placed a steadying hand on Ryan's shoulder. "I'm with you," she said, voice firm enough to anchor him, even though her own chest heaved. He nodded, grateful for an ally in the dark. Above them, the remaining lights flickered like fireflies fighting to stay lit. The engine sputtered, mechanical hearts struggling against an unseen chokehold. Every second felt like a mile. A man in 18F clutched the arm of his seat, eyes wide. "Is someone flying this thing?" he stammered. Ryan offered him a quick nod. Not words, there was no time. His mind raced through checklists and procedures ingrained from years in the air. He recalled the drills: engine out forced, glide manual control priority. 1, keep the nose level, conserve airspeed, find the runway. Mia reached them now, her face pale but determined. "You two up front," she commanded. Her gaze was pure focus, a lifeline tethered to the cockpit. Every second counts. Ryan stood straighter, lifting Lily so that Victoria could carry her the rest of the way. Lily's tiny arms clung to her father's neck. "Daddy." "The sky is silent," she whispered. "It's listening," he replied, voice calm in the collapse of normalcy. He kissed her cheek, then handed her gently to Victoria, who wrapped her arms around the child, as though protecting precious cargo. Ryan knelt quickly to buckle Lily's seatbelt across Victoria's lap, no time for ceremony, but enough to keep her safe. Victoria locked eyes with Ryan. "Go," she urged. "I'll get her settled." He nodded in gratitude, then rose to stride down the aisle, each step a promise of action over despair. Passengers parted like curtains. Glances of fear mingled with hope as Ryan passed. A teenage boy offered him a hesitant thumbs up. An elderly woman murmured a prayer. He acknowledged them with a brief inclination of his head, solidarity in crisis. As he reached the cockpit door, Mia pressed a stabilizing hand on his shoulder. "Godspeed," she whispered. He met her gaze. "See you on the other side," he said. She ducked back into the cabin just as he pressed his palm to the door's keypad. The latch clicked and he stepped into the quiet storm of the cockpit. The small chamber glowed with emergency lighting instruments strobing warnings across the panels. The captain sat slumped at the control's oxygen mask dangling. The first officer was slumped, eyes closed, unresponsive. Ryan's training kicked in, check, cockpit secure. He straightened the captain's seat, locked the yoke in place, then reached for the throttle quadrant. Only one lever responded, dead stick descent engaged. The autopilot panel blinked off. He paused, taking in the sight of gauges flickering between 0 and red. No thrust. Hydraulic pressure low. Cabin altitude climbing. His heart pounded. Somewhere behind him, the hum of panicked voices in the cabin rose and fell like distant waves. He switched to the radio. Greensboro approach flight 729. Captain and first officer incapacitated. Request immediate vectors and priority for single-engine approach. The static reply was slow to come, but he held the mic steady. Reply, please respond. A crackling voice finally broke through Flight 729. We read you. Confirm only one engine. You are cleared for... The message cut off as radio turbulence overwhelmed the line. Ryan's jaw set. He toggled frequencies, finding a direct military band. Sarah, this is Carter, he said into the headset he'd clipped to the side. He hadn't expected to use his old call sign, let alone this channel. Seconds stretched. Then a familiar voice, calm and urgent. Carter, you read? We're patching you through. You have my VFR vectors and clearance. Execute dead stick approach. Runway 22. We stand by. He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Understood. Vectors locked. Heading set. Thank you. He clicked off the mic heart, settling into mission mode. He flicked switches, rerouted auxiliary power to critical systems, then swept his gaze across the cockpit. The windshield revealed only darkness pierced by distant city lights far below. Lightning from the earlier storm had cleared, but the tension in the air remained. Ryan took one last breath, finding center. He pressed his palms to the yoke muscles, coiling for action. Let's do this. He whispered more to himself than to any listening instrument. Behind him, the cockpit door slid open as Mia returned, ready to coordinate cabin procedures for the emergency descent. She handed him a checklist verbally. Secure loose items. Call for final cabin brace. Report seating counts. He absorbed her words, nodding as he activated cabin chime. Brace positions now. A muffled chorus of moving bodies, belts clicking in the dark. Ryan felt the plane shiver as it began its unpowered glide, and for the first time since the engine died, he embraced the silence not as an absence, but as a new kind of signal, one that demanded every skill he'd thought lost to time. And in that cockpit at 30,000 feet with the world rushing up to meet him, Ryan Carter reclaimed his purpose. A broke single dad in row 17B. No more. He was once again the man who could fly them all home. The cockpit door groaned as Ryan Carter pressed against it, the heavy metal hissing open to reveal a tableau of controlled chaos in dim red emergency light. Instruments flickered, alarms muted, but urgent warning lights blinking like nervous eyes. In the co-pilot seat, a young woman lay slumped, her flight jacket askew, oxygen mask dangling uselessly at her neck. The captain, an older man with silver hair and creased features, rested face down on the control yoke, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. Neither stirred as Ryan crossed the threshold, Lily's tin-white bear clutch bouncing at his hip as he knelt by the co-pilot's side. "Sir, are you all right?" he called gently, tapping his shoulder. The woman's stirred eyelids fluttering, but her eyes never focused. Ryan eased her mask back over her mouth and nose, then turned to the captain. Captain Rodriguez, he'd heard, slipped the mask into place and checked the quick-release valve. Still no consciousness. He straightened, heart pounding, not with fear, but with a familiar rush of purpose. A voice behind him broke the low hum of emergency sirens in the cabin. Ryan Sandra Martinez, the lead flight attendant, crouched at the open door, her uniform sharp, despite the flashing lights. Dark curls escaped her bun, and her brown eyes bore the fire of someone who'd seen trouble, but never like this. "What's happening?" she asked, breathless. He rose into the glow, pulling off his hoodie and revealing the olive-green shirt beneath. The broad patches across his chest were a telltale hint, an Air National Guard insignia faded, but still recognizable. "I need you to help me secure them," he said, voice steady. "They're alive, but we've got minutes before cabin pressure goes critical." Sandra's gaze flicked between Ryan and the two unconscious pilots. She swallowed hard, taking a shaky step forward. I can get the medical kit. Do you want the first aid pack?" "Yes," Ryan replied, his tone shifting to command a tone he'd used countless times on dusty desert airstrips. "And lock that door behind you. No one else enters until I give the all clear." Nodding. Sandra sprang into motion, closing the cockpit door behind her with a soft click and racing to the aft panel to retrieve the crash kit. Ryan moved to the co-pilot seat first, testing for a pulse. It was faint, but there. He opened the overhead light, illuminating medical clamps and oxygen cylinders. With practiced efficiency, he checked the co-pilot's airway, administered a quick flow of oxygen, and massaged a prosthetic stimulator. The co-pilot coughed tight-lipped, then groaned as consciousness seeped back. "Stay with me," Ryan urged gently. The co-pilot's eyes blinked open, confusion swimming before clarity. Sandra knelt beside them, handing over gauze and mask. "She's stable for now," Ryan said, voice softening slightly. "We'll need her to monitor cabin pressure once we get it under control." He moved swiftly to the captain, shifting instruments out of the way as he applied the same techniques. Captain Rodriguez coughed a raspy sound that echoed off the metal bulkheads and sat bolt upright, eyes wild, until they landed on Ryan's uniform patch. Carter, the captain, rasped, voice thick. "What are you—" "No time, sir," Ryan said, guiding Rodriguez by the shoulders until the captain's mask covered his face. "Sit back. We need you to stabilize the controls if I can get the engines back online." Ryan placed the captain carefully in the co-pilot's seat and slid into the captain's position, the black leather creaking under him. The yoke was cold, the array of switches unfamiliar in their severity, but beneath his palms it felt reassuringly solid. He spoke into the intercom. "Flight 729 to cabin, your crew is responding. Return to your seats, keep belts fastened, and prepare for possible descent. Sandra, can you confirm life support systems?" Her voice crackled back. "Oxygen cylinders pressurized, portable unit functional. Cabin pressure holding at 14,000 feet equivalent." Ryan exhaled, nodding even though she couldn't see him. Then he reached to the left console, flipping the power selector to AUX, bypassing the damaged generators. Sparks flickered along the panel. Warning lights danced, then a soft hum as auxiliary power bank engaged. Gauges flickered to life, hydraulics at 40% cabin altitude, blinking but stable. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He flipped on the captain's radio and found the emergency frequency pre-programmed into a toggle. "Greensboro Center. This is Flight 729 Captain speaking, Carter, formerly guard. Both pilots incapacitated, one engine lost, requesting emergency vectors. Static, tick, static." Then a crisp voice answered, "Flight 729 Greensboro Center. Reading you. Confirm one engine co-pilot conscious, over." Ryan opened the valve for his microphone. "Confirm one engine co-pilot conscious. Controls currently locked under manual override. I'm assuming command. Request immediate clearance for emergency dead stick approach." Relief crackled in the controller's response. "Flight 729 clearance granted. Runway 22 priority. Fire and rescue standing by. Vector 270 degrees, maintain 2000 until further instructed." Ryan exhaled, pressing his forehead to the yoke. "Thank you," he murmured. Then, as though no time had passed, he flipped back to cabin comms. "Cabin, this is the captain speaking, his voice a calm anchor amid turmoil. We have vectors and runway priority. Expect descent in 7 minutes. Keep belts secure and brace positions ready." Back to Sandra, who stood in the doorway. "We've got clearance," Ryan said more gently. "Inform the cabin, then secure your station." Tipping his head toward the co-pilot seat, he saw Rodriguez nodding off. He'd need to wake him again to monitor fuel and hydraulics. But for now, Ryan's focus was flight controls. He reached for the throttle's left side, stuck at idle with only one engine. He guided them gently to maximum permissible power on the right, feeling the airframe groan in acknowledgement. Sandra re-entered her presence, a steady reminder of the crew he'd temporarily displaced. "Cabin informed passengers responding well," she reported. "They're holding, trusting us." Ryan offered her a small, grateful nod. "Good work. Now help me run through gear and flaps, check manual only." She pointed to the checklist on the side panel. Together they ran through every line flap set to 20 degrees, gear locked down with emergency extension handle trim fields adjusted for a glide speed of 140 knots. The wind buffet against the windshield intensified as they began the slow descent, cloud layers parting to reveal distant runway lights glittering like a beacon. "That's runway 22 at 10 o'clock. "Low," Ryan murmured, scanning the horizon. Fire crews are lit up on the left shoulder. "Hard to miss." Sandra's eyes shone with awe. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you're up here. She swallowed the rest. I was terrified. He paused, surprised by the honesty. In another life, he'd have offered a dry military quip, but here in the hush of cockpit emergency lighting, he could only speak human truth. I need you to trust that we can do this, he said simply. Keep the cabin calm. I'll keep this bird in the air. She nodded, returning to her station as he focused back on the instruments. The plane glided now, one engine humming a defiant tune against altitude and gravity. Ryan traced each gauge like a lifeline, coaxing the fuselage toward the runway. Inch by inch, foot by foot, propelled by adrenaline and decades-old skill he'd once thought lost. In that moment, engines silenced two pilots down a flight attendant's unwavering support, and a bleeding array of warning lights. Ryan Carter reclaimed his purpose. The cockpit's eerie glow felt like home, every switch and lever a familiar friend. He guided the plane on a path carved by experience, not automation, by instinct, not instructions. And somewhere in the cabin, Victoria Blake held Lily close, her gaze fixed on the cockpit door, trusting the man who'd walked through it. In the hush before descent, in the tempest of system failures, a single dad-turned mechanic had become the captain once more, ready to draw on every ounce of training, every ounce of courage to save them all. Ryan Carter's hands trembled only for a moment as he reached up and flipped the autopilot switch into the off position. Immediately, the cabin lurched, a steel groan rippling through the fuselage as the redundant systems winked out one by one. The twin engines, one long, silenced the other, sputtering its last, ceased their final moan, and the cockpit lights flared before settling into an ominous half-darkness. Ryan inhaled sharply, then exhaled, letting every ounce of tension drain from his shoulders. There was no longer an automated hand steadying the yoke. He was alone, relying on years-old muscle memory to keep this wounded aircraft aloft. Below him, the altimeter began its steady tick downward. He guided the yoke forward just enough to maintain a gentle nose-down attitude. Too steep a dive would bleed off airspeed. Too shallow, and they risked a stall. He eased into the trim wheel, his fingers deftly adjusting the stabilizer plane so the aircraft's weight would continue its powerless glide toward Greensboro. The cabin lights flickered again, then settled into a subdued red that made the cockpit feel both sacred and foreboding. Flight 729, he keyed the mic voice, calm but edged with gravity. We are offline, requesting last known vectors for runway 22. Over. Static filled the earset. He toggled frequencies, cycling through emergency channels, military guard bands, even the handheld radios in the cabin, anything that might patch him through. All he heard was hiss and crackle. The only coherent reply came through his co-pilot's headset, now attended by Captain Rodriguez's recovering lungs. Hold flight 729. Stand by. Then silence swallowed the line. Ryan kissed the earpiece to his lip. Hold, he murmured into the dead switch. Not helpful. He flicked his gaze to the flight path indicator, a faint dot against the blackness, the runway's beacon nearly dead ahead. The glimmer was reassuring. If he could keep them level and aligned, gravity would do the rest, and the ground crews would be ready. Every passenger's life, every family waiting on the ground now hinged on his ability to balance feathered controls against an unforgiving descent. He glanced at the fuel gauges. Empty. No auxiliaries, no crossfeeds, only the sheer glide. His HUD displayed airspeed dropping from 180 knots to 150. He nudged the throttle quadrant, the surviving handle clicking against the idle stop, but the engine's silence gave no response. He released it, letting the instrument fall gently back. In the cabin, passengers felt the shift. A collective sway passed through them like a slow wave. Mothers clutched children. Strangers locked eyes. In that hush, they realized no one else could save them. Ryan felt their unspoken prayers press against his backrest, 1,000 hopes urging him to steady the descent. He turned to the co-pilot and captain's seats. Captain Rodriguez, pale but conscious, was scanning the same instruments with a milder panic. Ryan offered a curt nod. Gear and flaps at 20, he said, voice matter of fact. There were no checklists, no bullet points, just direct commands bridging his instinct and their fading hydraulics. Rodriguez reached to the flap lever, easing it to the 20-degree detent. Sandra Martinez, the flight attendant turned assistant, entered with a medical kit in hand before retreating to secure the cockpit door. Her presence brought a small comfort. She'd anchored the cabin under his direction. Now she stood ready to tend wherever he pointed. The shallow rumble of wind engulfed the cockpit as they pierced cloud layers. Ryan watched the vertical speed indicator minus 2,500 feet per minute. He needed to bleed altitude without sacrificing forward momentum. He adjusted trim once more, bump by bump, until the yoke felt like an extension of his forearms, responding instantaneously to minute shifts in weight. He breathed in time with his granddaughter's emergency heart monitor in the cabin 2 beats in 4 beats out. That rhythm steadied his nerves. Each exhale expelled doubt. Each inhale refilled purpose. He reached for the center console and pressed the cabin intercom. Cabin crew prepare for dead stick approach. Brace positions now. He heard movement. Seatbelts snapped, carts latched. Prayers muttered. A soft hush fell, punctuated only by the wind's desperate howl outside. His gaze returned to the runway lights, now a golden ribbon winding through the darkness below. The distance closed swiftly, 20 miles out, 1510. He referenced the clock-mounted altimeter, 12,000 feet. 7 minutes left. He recalled a desert airstrip in Kandahar, a night under fire where he'd guided a wounded C-130 to touchdown with only an instrument horizon flickering. The memory's adrenaline surged steel in his veins. He hadn't flown in a decade, but the cockpit's metal cradle reignited something ancient, the promise he made to protect no matter the cost. Greensboro Center. He radioed, voice sharpened. Flight 729 on final. Altitude 10,000 descending. Do you copy? We need confirmation of emergency clearance. This time, a crisp reply. Flight 729, you are clear. No other traffic in your approach path. Emergency crews alerted. Priority landing authorized. Attention eased in his chest at that crucial word clearance. Not permission, but certainty. There would be runway fire trucks, paramedics. For once he wasn't alone in this descent. He banked the yoke slightly to starboard, aligning the glide slope with a runway marker that pulsed in the distance. The landing light, unused but intact, flickered on overhead, casting bone-white beams into the night. He toggled it, verifying its arc swept the asphalt below, tracing the precise path he'd memorize in the next minutes. Rodriguez, now alert and steady, reached out. You having trouble with carb heat? He asked. Voice stronger. Idle, Ryan said, cutting to the chase. No power to distribution. Keep an eye on N1 gauge for windmill rotation. If we get spin, maybe we eke out a restart. Rodriguez nodded, glancing at the engine gauge, a slow climb from 0 to a puttering 20%. They both held their breaths, but the engine didn't bite. Ryan shook his head. We glide it, he decided, eyes forward. Below the runway lights swelled into a continuous band, 30 seconds to touchdown. Ryan reached to the propeller control developed in his old guard aircraft, where feathering preserved lift and prevented drag. One propeller blade threw itself parallel to the airflow, sacrificing thrust for glide quality. He repeated on the right. Now no rotating blades to slow them, a clean fuselage cutting through the air. He eased the flare, gently pulling back on the yoke as the runway threshold came rushing up. His feet hovered over the rudder pedals, ready to correct yaw. He felt the landing gear respond with a soft thunk they'd locked down under emergency gravity extension. A momentary bump signaled readiness, wheels flaps, and fuselage aligned. He exhaled one final time, lifting the nose fractionally to scrub speed. Wind buffeted the windshield with final patter. All around him the world was soundless, no engines, no alarms, just the hush of nylon and steel descending into awaiting floodlights. Then wheels kissed asphalt. A firm thud. The cabin shuddered as rubber met ground. Ryan held the yoke steady, steering the glide path along the center stripe. Hydraulic brakes hissed to life, diminished, but functional, and he pressed backward gently, guiding speed out of the equation. The runway unspooled beneath them, marks racing past until the aircraft rolled to a half stop, coasting on momentum before yawing to a gentle halt. Silence broken only by Ryan's ragged exhale. He held the yoke in place, chest-heaving sweat soaking his uniform shirt. The cabin's hush gave way to the first tentative applause, a ripple of relief that swelled into heartfelt cheers. Sandra's steady voice crackled over the intercom, trembling with emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Greensboro. Please remain seated until ground crews arrive. Ryan killed the lights, shut down the auxiliary power, and reached for Lily's small hand-shaped call button on the aft panel. The door released and Sandra re-entered, her eyes shining through tear tracks. She pressed the button. The cockpit door opened, and in the red afterglow, Ryan Carter felt the weight of 142 lives settle like a gentle blessing on his shoulders. He glanced at the co-pilot and captain. They were upright, dazed, but unharmed. He exhaled again, a breath of both triumph and humility. Outside floodlights danced across the tarmac. Fire trucks raced to the wings, and a phalanx of first responders prepared to sweep through the cabin. Ryan took one last steadying look at the runway ribbon that had carried them home. No engines, no autopilot, no second chances, just a man, his muscle memory, and a cold-blooded calm born of love and duty. He unbuckled Rose and stepped toward the cockpit door, ready to face a world forever changed by a powerless glide. The glow of the runway lights spilled through the cockpit windshield, painting the instruments in streaks of amber. Ryan Carter sat in the captain's seat, boots pressed firmly into the rudder pedals, his eyes locked on the horizon where steel met earth. For a moment, he allowed himself a silent thrill. Surviving a dead stick glide was one thing, but being cleared to land was another. He keyed the radio mic once more. Greensboro approach flight 729. Engines down. Request final runway clearance. Static crackled in his headset, followed by a clipped voice. Flight 729, hold your position. We are unable to confirm an active flight crew license. FAA protocol requires valid certification before granting landing clearance. Please stand by for command review. A cold knot of dread tightened in Ryan's chest. He'd traded his Air Guard wing for a rideshare wrench nearly 10 years ago. The world's paperwork told one story, his uniform another. But this moment was life or death, and bureaucracy was no shield against gravity. With a grim exhale, he cut the mic and turned to Sandra, who knelt beside him, her face pale but resolute. They won't clear us without a license, he explained. We can't wait. Sandra's brow furrowed as she glanced back toward the cabin where passengers clasped each other's hands in quiet prayer. Ryan's granddaughter Lily sat under Victoria's careful arm, her wide eyes reflecting the dim red light. We need to do something, Sandra said. We can't just sit here. Ryan nodded, glancing at the cabin door. He had one ally left, the anonymous businesswoman seated in 17C, whose own scandal had brought her to this plane in hiding. Caught in the middle of this crisis, Victoria Blake had remained calm, adjusting Lily's seatbelt, comforting other frightened children, and now she would need to leverage every ounce of her influence. He freed himself from the yoke and unbuckled. Victoria, he called over his shoulder. I need you up here. Seconds later, Victoria slipped into the cockpit, clutching Lily's sketchbook to her chest. Her tailored blazer, you saw a moment ago now, hung open, and her silk blouse bore the faintest shimmer of perspiration. She looked at Ryan, then at the radio panel. What's the holdup? She demanded quietly. He rewound the exchange. They say I don't have an active license on file. FAA protocol won't let me land a plane without it. Victoria's gaze sharpened. She opened her bag, pulled out her phone, and whispered an instruction. Ryan recognized the authority in her tone. This was no casual request. He returned to the yoke and adjusted the throttle, keeping the aircraft gliding on its precarious path while she made the call. Victoria tapped rapidly, her voice calm but urgent. Colonel Hayes, she said into the phone. This is Victoria Blake Greenstone Medical. We just had an emergency landing with Flight 729, and the pilot, Ryan Carter, is verified by your unit. We need confirmation stat. She paused, listening, then straightened. Understood. Thank you, Colonel. She handed Ryan her phone. She's on the line, she said. He brought the handset to his ear and heard the crisp drawl of Colonel Sarah Hayes' voice firm. Carter, salute. You're cleared to execute the emergency approach. I've authorized it through the 139th. Greensboro Tower will comply immediately. Ryan closed his eyes and leaned back, letting relief wash through him like warm rain. Thank you, ma'am, he said, voice reverent. I won't let you down. Bring them home, Colonel Hayes replied. Then the line clicked dead. Ryan pressed the radio mic again. Greensboro approach. This is Flight 729. Colonel Sarah Hayes, 139th Airlift Wing, confirms my credentials. We are cleared to land runway 22, requesting immediate priority. There was a beat. Then the controller's voice came back crisp and efficient. Flight 729, you are cleared. All other traffic is holding. Policy exception granted. Proceed to landing. The words felt like a lifeline unspooling across the void. Ryan exhaled loudly, straightened his shoulders, and keyed the cabin intercom. Cabin crew. This is Captain Carter. We have clearance to land. Brace positions in 30 seconds. Thank you for your patience. He turned to the co-pilot's seat where Captain Rodriguez had recovered enough to grasp his arm. Sir, stand by for final flare. The captain nodded, eyes bright with gratitude. Back in first class, Victoria closed her eyes for the first time since takeoff. She let the tension drain, then opened them with renewed resolve. She felt Lily's tiny hand slip into hers and squeeze gently. We're almost there, she whispered. Ryan guided the glide path more precisely now, banking slightly to align with the runway's edge lights. The plane's metal frame creaked with the strain, but held together just as they would, he assured himself. As the runway lights blazed beneath them, he prepared for the final sequence flare touchdown brakes. The runway was a promise in the dark, but the moments leading to it were lived in stark clarity. Here we go, he murmured, pulling gently back on the yoke. The nose rose fractionally, the airframe kissed by the wind as the wheels met the tarmac. A firm thud, the entire fuselage jolting through to the cabin floor. Ryan held the yoke steady, guiding the plane down the center line, the runway unspooling like a golden thread. Brake handles engaged. Spoilers burst open, shearing off lift. The plane decelerated, the deafening roar of tires on the runway, replaced by a soft hiss of hydraulic systems re-engaging. When the aircraft rolled to a complete stop, Ryan killed the auxiliary power and sat in the sudden hush sweat glistening on his brow. He pressed a hand to his chest where his heart thudded a triumphant rhythm. Over the intercom, Sandra's voice came trembling but triumphant. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Greensboro. Please remain seated while ground crews board. Ryan exhaled the weight of every second lifting from his shoulders. He unbuckled and stood hands spread on the yoke as though saying goodbye to an old friend. Beside him, Captain Rodriguez placed a hand on his shoulder. Thank you, the captain said, voice thick. I owe you my life. Ryan shook his head. We all did our part. He turned to the cabin door and cracked it open. Outside, floodlights raced toward the plane, fire trucks and ambulances forming an arch of red and blue. He glanced at Victoria in the first row, their eyes locking in a moment of wordless understanding. Then he walked back into the cabin where every passenger was already on their feet, faces alight with awe and gratitude. He reached Lily's seat where Victoria knelt beside her. All done, sweetheart, he said softly. Lily's blue goggles reflected tears of joy as she threw herself into his arms. Ryan lifted her into a hug, and the cabin erupted into spontaneous applause and ovation, not for a hero in uniform, but for a man who reclaimed the sky when it mattered most. As Ryan stepped down the aisle, Sandra appeared at his side. Not a bad day's work, she said, smiling through tears. He tipped his head. Couldn't have done it without you. At the rear of the plane, Victoria caught up to him, still holding Lily. She pressed a hand to his forearm. Thank you, she whispered, her corporate veneer gone, replaced by genuine warmth. For everything. He shook his head and crouched to Lily's level. Come on, Bug. Let's go home. And so they did, one licensed pilot, one corporate executive, and one brave little girl stepping off a powerless plane onto solid ground bound by an unspoken promise that in the thousands of feet between earth and sky, the human spirit can still write its own clearance to land. Ryan Carter's voice crackled through the cabin speakers, clear, calm, and laced with conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Carter. I need you all to trust gravity. And trust me. His words hung in the air, a lifeline cast across 142 frightened souls suspended between sky and ground. For a heartbeat, there was silence as the intercom clicked off, the only sound the soft whoosh of conditioned air and the faint hum of stressed hydraulics. Then something remarkable happened. Strangers reached out as though drawn by an invisible tether. An elderly woman in row 12 gripped the hand of the man next to her, his plaid shirt a comforting counterpoint to her frayed cardigan. His other hand flew instinctively to the armrest where a teenage boy in 19G earbuds dangling uselessly pressed play on his phone, then paused the music and looked up, eyes flicking from the aisle to the worried faces around him and back to the cabin lights above. A mother in 15C held her toddler close. The child's small face buried into her neck, tiny fingers digging into her blouse. She whispered something soft. No one could hear the words, but the toddler's trembling eased a faint sigh, replacing muffled sobs. Victoria Blake sat rigid in 17C until Carter's message touched her. Her silk blouse was damp with sweat, but her posture softened. She slipped Lily from her lap and cradled her tightly brushing strands of hair from the little girl's pale forehead. Lily's goggles reflected the panoply of emotion swirling around them, yet she clung to Victoria's shoulder without fear because her father was in the cockpit flying them home. In the aft cabin, Maria Gonzalez, a flight attendant from row 23, paused mid-aisle, hand pressed against an overhead panel for balance. She locked eyes with a passenger across the way, a businessman whose tailored suit had seemed out of place just minutes ago. Their gazes held for a moment, a silent communion of survivor's hope, before he slipped his hand into hers, squeezing firmly. "I think I like him," he muttered softly, nodding to the front. Maria smiled without humor, a deep expression of something fierce and genuine. "He'll get us down," she said. "He has to." Nearby, a college student backpack slung over his seat looked at his classmates, dozens of eyes meeting his. He flicked off his earbuds and folded them carefully into his pocket. "No music," he announced, voice steadier than he felt. "Just breathing, okay?" Heads nodded. Faces turned forward, unified by a father's plea rather than a stranger's calm assurance. Even the typically reserved first-class passengers who'd spend much of the flight in silent solitude shared hesitant smiles. A wallflower in 1A rested her hand on the arm of an elderly stranger beside her. On her lap lay a volunteer's kit for a humanitarian mission in Greensboro, now a symbol of the very unity she sought across geopolitical differences. She whispered, "We'll make it," as though confessing a vow to herself as much as to him. Back in coach, a pair of backpackers who had spent the flight quarreling over seat assignments now leaned into each other with arms draped over shoulders. "I'm sorry," one said, voice choked. I was scared." The other squeezed his hand. "Me too. Thanks for saying so." Amid this chorus of small gestures, Victoria lifted Lily's chin so the child could see her eyes. "Daddy said to trust gravity," she told her softly. Lily nodded once, tears still glistening, but her small nod was resolute. Victoria brushed Lily's bangs back, pressing a light kiss to her temple. "And trust me," she added, voice unwavering in the dim cabin. In row 22, a retired school teacher eyed the glowing runic display of runway lights through the window. She extended her hand to the seat back ahead, fingertips brushing the metal latch instead of fidgeting with her rosary. She whispered a prayer for each life aboard, knowing every blessing counted. From the cockpit, Ryan felt the shift in atmosphere, no longer a collection of fearful souls, but a community bound by one man's courage and one father's love. He stole a glance at Captain Rodriguez and Sandra, both scanning the cabin monitors. Even they couldn't disguise the awe in their eyes. "Cabin crew." Ryan's voice came softer this time. "Thank you." The brief acknowledgement was more than protocol. It was an embrace of shared purpose. Maria, returning to her station, caught the intercom feed and let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. She offered a brave smile to the passengers as she passed her uniform, once again the emblem of service rather than stress. Victoria returned Lily to Ryan's waiting arms when he unbucked himself to verify cabin status. She leaned into the aisle, shouting above the soft murmur, "Everyone, just a little longer. He's bringing us home." The cabin answered with a rising swell of applause, not loud or overwhelming, but steady and unanimous, like a tide of human trust washing away terror. The applause sounded not for a perfect landing, but for the quiet bravery of men and women who chose to believe each other in the face of crisis. A mother in 14B lifted her toddler up high, letting the child wave at the cockpit door. The child did so, tiny hand flapping, and the mother beamed. In that gesture was a testament even the youngest among them sensed the unity, the invisible bond tying the flight deck to the cabin floor. Ryan returned to the yoke, the freeze frame of that applause echoing in his mind. He exhaled deeply, less to steady himself than to honor the faith entrusted to him. The runway threshold grew larger in the windshield, and he guided the powerless descent toward solid ground with a renewed sense of purpose. Down below, he could see the firefighters' silhouettes moving in synchrony, as though they too had heard his plea to trust and believed. The airport lights flickered in salute runway 22, opening its arms to receive them. Inside the cabin, Victoria rocked Lily, gently humming a lullaby that wove itself into the hum of the glide path. Other passengers joined in softly, a chorus of quiet songs, rising into the receding hum of fear. And for the first time since the engines failed, the aircraft felt less like a vessel of steel and more like a cradle, a living cell of human faith and shared breath, all guided by a father's promise and a pilot's steady hand. As the runway neared, the cabin's collective heartbeat synced with Ryan's, an unspoken pact that their trust in him would carry them home. In that cabin of faith, unity replaced fear, and a powerless plane became a testament to what happens when strangers choose to believe together. The runway lights glimmered ahead like a promise carved into the darkness, their long, even spacing a lifeline guiding Flight 729's powerless glide. Ryan Carter's knuckles whitened on the yoke as he oriented the aircraft's nose just abaft the threshold, angling it for the perfect 3-degree descent. The altimeter's needle spun past 8,000 feet, 7-6, each thousand a heartbeat echoing in his chest. Below him, the tarmac stretched out in a narrow ribbon of salvation, bordered by fire trucks lined up like sentinels, their engines idling in readiness. "Gear down," he murmured, flipping the undercarriage lever. A soft metallic thunk resonated through the cabin as the landing gear dropped into place, 3 sets of wheels extending to receive them. Strut indicators flickered green locked. He glanced at the flap handle, gently easing it from 20 to 30 degrees, the trailing edges of the wings bending in a silent ballet. Flaps 30, he confirmed, eyes sweeping to the trim wheel where a single notch adjustment centered the controls. There was no time for hesitation. Every gauge and dial held a story. The VSI vertical speed indicator still showed minus 2,000 feet per minute. The airspeed hovered at 125 knots within landing parameters for an unpowered approach. He let the yoke lighten, trusting the aircraft's wing design to generate enough lift for the descent. A soft vibration hummed through the control column as the slip turned to a steady wing-level approach. Captain Rodriguez, resituated in the co-pilot seat, peered over Ryan's shoulder. "We're stable," he said. Voice hushed but anchored in relief. "No surprises yet." Ryan nodded, lips pursed. "Too many surprises yesterday." He pressed a thumb to the intercom switch. "Cabin. This is Captain Carter Brace. Positions for touchdown. I'll see you on the ground." His words were measured. He spoke not to scare, but to prepare. He toggled back to landing lights, the flood lamps igniting with a brief flicker before bathing the cockpit in harsh white. He inhaled through his nose, filling his lungs with a steely resolve. Beside him, the radio crackled. "Flight 729, you are clear. Wind calm. Runway is yours," Roger, Ryan said, switching frequencies off. The world outside condensed to runway 22, a single line to be honored. He leaned forward, scanning the runway's roundel markers, each one growing in size, inching upward through the windshield. Then came the distance markers, 3,000 feet, 2,015 each, passing under the nose with hypnotic precision. He thought of Lily curled in the arms of Victoria Blake, in 17C wheels of trust turning in her small chest. Her goggles had come off to reveal wide, trusting eyes, the same eyes that had guided him through desert storms and midnight maneuvers long ago. He hadn't flown a C-130 in a decade, but the muscle memory remained a ghost in his limbs, whispering commands in his marrow. 200 feet, Rodriguez called, voice low. Ryan's fingers danced on the trim wheel, one click starboard, then port, keeping his glide slope aligned. The flare zone was imminent. Only a fraction of a degree separated a perfect touchdown from a high-speed bounce or a stall. He adjusted the yoke ever so slightly, raising the nose to trade speed for attitude. The runway's edge lights morphed into a single band of brightness. "Minimums," Rodriguez said, rechecking his scan of the approach path. Ryan's heart hammered, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility. He recalled a night in Kandahar cockpit, awash in starlight, as tracer rounds danced across the horizon. That mission had demanded courage. This one demanded precision. He whispered a vow not to any higher power, but to gravity and to Lily, "I won't leave you behind." Below the runway threshold was less than 100 feet beneath them. Ryan eased the yoke fully back, flaring the aircraft into a gentle roundout. The wind buffeted the fuselage, a final test of control. The main wheels kissed the runway with a soft boom that reverberated along the floorboards. For a moment they hung in balance, two steel hearts alight with hope. He held the controls firm, allowing the spoilers to arm. A quick toggle, and they burst open on cue shearing lift and pressing the metal down onto the asphalt. Ryan applied reverse thrust on the sole engine left, a live feeble thrust but enough to help scrub speed. The nose wheel lowered with a clunk, aligning the nose gear with the center line. 20 knots. Rodriguez noted voice, bright. Brakes. Ryan pressed the hydraulic lever, feeling the pedals bite as brake assemblies engaged. The aircraft slowed in a controlled slide, shedding momentum with the precise grace of a glider landing in a bowl. Fire trucks roared past on either side, their water cannons spraying arcs of mist. Windshield wipers swept the droplets away as though clearing his view for the next big step, safe stop. He held the yoke firm until the speed bled to near zero, then gently parked the plane on the runway center line. A final click as the spoilers returned to neutral, engines shut down in a single master switch flip. The cockpit sank into the stillness that only follows high tension. 4 sets of wheels, 22 oxygen-starved souls, and a father's vow had pulled them through. Ryan exhaled a long, shuddering breath that carried a tide of relief. He turned to Rodriguez, sharing the unspoken gratitude of 2 pilots, 1 veteran instructor, 1 sudden rescuer. Rodriguez's hand came to rest on Ryan's shoulder. "You did it." Ryan nodded, voice hoarse. "We did it." He keyed the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Greensboro. On behalf of the crew, thank you for your trust. Please remain seated until ground crews secure the aircraft." From the aisles erupted cheers, tears, laughter, an involuntary symphony of release. Ryan shot a quick glance over his shoulder, passengers pressing forward to see the cockpit, hugging neighbors, clasping photos of loved ones. In 17C, Victoria rose with Lily in her arms, walking toward the front row with cautious joy. Ryan stepped from the cockpit into a corridor alive with relief and wonder. He knelt to Lily's level as Victoria brought her to him. The little girl looked up through wide eyes, face streaked with tears. "You did it, Daddy," she whispered, wrapping her arms around his neck. He closed his eyes, pressing his cheek to her hair. "I promised," he murmured, voice cracking with emotion. "I never leave you behind." In that final descent, Ryan Carter had guided more than an aircraft he had guided, hope itself, landing it safely on solid ground. The moment the wheels of Flight 729 met the runway, a hush descended across the cockpit, an almost reverent silence that clung to every metal rivet and plastic switch. Then came the thud, a deep and grounding echo as rubber kissed asphalt, sending a gentle shudder through the airframe. Ryan Carter held the yoke firm, his knuckles white against the molded grips as the spoilers hissed open with purpose, peeling off lift like a soft exhale of tension. No bounce, no abrupt veer, only the satisfying tug of heavy steel settling finally onto solid earth. The runway lights streamed past the windows in blurred ribbons of gold and red until the plane slowed to a crawl, the tire tread leaving a fleeting imprint on the black ribbon below. He coaxed the brake levers forward, feeling the gentle resistance as hydraulic pressure gripped the disc brakes, bleeding off speed with a deliberate grace. For an instant, the world outside the cockpit narrowed to a single moment of perfect execution and impossible survival. His heart pounded, each beat reverberating in his temples, but his hands remained steady, guiding the aircraft down the center line until the ground speed dropped below a crawl. He killed the auxiliary power switch, plunging the cockpit back into a dim calm, interrupted only by the faint glow of standby instrument lights. Then the intercom came alive with a wave of sound that washed through the cabin, spontaneous cheers, claps, sobs of relief, laughter ringing like bells. Flight attendants who had once moved through the aisles with trembling hands now leaned into the seats, their faces alight with awe. Passengers unbuckled in a flurry of motion, hugging strangers, wiping tears, pressing phones to capture the final seconds of an extraordinary descent. Ryan allowed himself a tight smile before exhaling a breath so deep it seemed to carry the weight of every mile flown and every life entrusted to him. He closed his eyes, letting tears mingle with laughter behind their lids. The gargantuan tension that had coiled through him from the moment the engines died dissolved in that exhalation, an emotional release that felt like both catharsis and confession. "Thank you," he murmured into the microphone, voice cracking with raw gratitude. "Welcome to Greensboro. Sandra Martinez, who had stood by his side through every crisis, watched him with an expression of fiercely proud disbelief. She pressed a hand to his shoulder, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. "You did it." He turned, nodding to Captain Rodriguez and the recovering co-pilot, whose hands trembled as they extended toward the controls long enough to kill the remaining systems. Above them, the cockpit door opened as Victoria Blake stepped forward, Lily still cradled in her arms. The little girl's eyes, wide with wonder, locked onto her father's face. "Daddy," Lily squealed, her small fingers brushing against his chest as Ryan dropped to one knee to meet her. He swept her into a hug so tight he felt her pulse against his uniform. The cabin's roar dimmed around them, fading into a backdrop of staccato applause and joyful cries. Victoria stood beside them, tears glistening on her cheeks. She reached out, brushing Ryan's hair from his forehead before tucking a strand behind her ear. "You did it," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You saved us all." Ryan pressed a kiss to Lily's crown, his voice trembling. "I promised I wouldn't leave you behind," he said, his gaze lifting to meet Victoria's. "And I never will." Behind them, a line of firefighters and paramedics formed along the cabin door, clipboards in hand and flashlights dancing over the fuselage as they prepared to escort every passenger to safety. But for a moment, no one moved. The cabin remained a tableau of stunned gratitude, as if no one dared break the spell of survival they had just lived through. A passenger in row 21. A businessman who had frowned at Ryan's hoodie and grease-stained uniform just hours earlier stood unsteadily, removing his tie and throwing it over his shoulder as a makeshift banner. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen," he told the flight attendant as he passed, voice still trembling. "I want to thank him." Maria Gonzalez. The young flight attendant, who had anchored the cabin with her calm efficiency, nodded and pointed toward the cockpit stairs. "Go on," she said gently. "He's here." One by one, passengers surged forward, pressing gifts into Ryan's hands. A child's toy plane, a small bouquet of wildflowers, hastily written notes of gratitude. For Lily, a grandmother in 14B said, pressing a small locket into his palm, "Keep this close." Ryan accepted each token with a quiet nod, emotion flickering in his eyes, as he realized how deeply his actions had touched these lives. He placed each gift on the instrument panel, an altar of gratitude blooming amidst the flickering gauges. Lily handed him a crumpled drawing she had made during the descent. A bright yellow sun over a plane with hearts for windows, the words "My Daddy Saves Planes" scrawled beneath in crayon. He unfolded it carefully, his throat catching as he read her childlike script. "That's my favorite landing gear," he teased her softly, brushing a tear from her cheek. Lily giggled, her small arms looping around his neck once again. Victoria stepped closer, pressing her hand on his shoulder. "We should probably get off," she said, but her voice lacked urgency. This moment was sacred, and no one yet wanted to leave it. He nodded slowly, wiping his eyes on the sleeve of his olive-green shirt. "Let's." Ryan stood Lily bobbing on his hip and faced the cabin one last time. The cheering swelled again, forming a wave of unfiltered joy. He raised a hand in salute, not as a pilot commanding respect, but as a father reclaiming his place in the world. As he descended the small cockpit stairs, he felt the plane's heartbeat pulse beneath his feet, an echo of the pilots and crew whose combined efforts had staved off disaster. He met Victoria in the aisle, and together they walked toward the cabin door, stepping into the floodlighted tarmac. Behind them, Flight 729's engines remained silent, yet the echo of its miracle landing would roar forever in the memories of those who lived it. Outside, a cool breeze carried the scent of rain and fresh asphalt. Firefighters saluted, paramedics offered water and blankets, and airport officials burst into applause as Ryan and Lily emerged into the night. Cameras flashed, capturing the image of a man in a faded uniform, tears glistening on his cheeks as he carried his daughter toward safety. Ryan lifted Lily's hand to his lips, planting a kiss on the top of her small palm. "Mission accomplished," he whispered, his voice steady at last. In that reverent stillness, wheels grounded, spoilers stilled, hearts alight. The miracle of a powerless landing became the testament of one man's grit, one child's faith, and an entire cabin's courage. And as the cheers carried into the night sky, Ryan Carter realized that the true measure of a hero was not in uniforms or licenses, but in the promise kept when the world leaned on you to deliver every life safely home. The cabin door thudded open under the floodlights of Greensboro's emergency vehicles, and a wave of cool night air swept through the aisles. Firefighters in bright yellow coats and paramedics in reflective vests swarmed the plane's entrance stretchers at the ready, their radios crackling with simultaneous demands for medical aid and crowd control. But by the time the first boots hit the steps, the real miracle had already occurred inside, etched on every trembling face and glistening eye. Passengers stepped into the aisle one by one, not as frightened travelers, but as survivors reborn. A young mother helped her toddler down the steps, the child's small hand clenched around hers as the mother's voice shook with gratitude. "Thank you, thank you." An elderly man in a worn tweed jacket leaned on his cane, tears streaming down his cheeks as he whispered into the darkness. "I never doubted him for a second." A teenager once lost in music clutched his phone with both hands, silent, now his gaze lifting skyward in awe rather than listening to earbuds. Ryan Carter stood at the bottom of the stairwell. Lily clutched to his chest, her tiny legs wrapped around his waist. His uniform olive-green shirt, engine grease smudged at the elbows, was speckled with sweat and tears, but he looked no less majestic for it. Each passenger who passed paused for a moment at the threshold, offering a broken nod or a wordless thank you before collecting themselves and moving on. In that brief exchange, Ryan recognized something he hadn't felt in years, genuine, unguarded respect. Among the throng, Victoria Blake emerged from the cabin, her designer suit replaced by a simple cashmere sweater she'd grabbed in haste. She held Lily's sketchbook, a keepsake of crayon hearts and smiling airplanes, close to her chest. Reporters and camera crews clustered near the ramp, their lenses drilling into the night, hungry for the next sensational headline. But Victoria stepped deliberately to the front, planting herself between the cameras and Ryan like a shield. A reporter thrust a microphone at Ryan's shoulder. "Captain Carter, can you describe what happened back there? The FAA wants an official statement." Victoria's voice rang out, cutting through the clamor. "No statement," she declared firmly. "This man regains his privacy and his peace of mind. If you want to tell stories, write about the bravery of every passenger who trusted him." The cameras flickered, momentarily silenced by the force of her conviction. Ryan's chest tightened at her defense. He saw in her eyes a fierce protectiveness, a woman who would no longer allow her daughter's hero, nor the pilot she had come to care for, to be commodified. He offered Victoria a grateful nod, then bent to brush a kiss across Lily's warm forehead. The child's eyes shone with unspent wonder as she whimpered, "Did we land safely?" "Daddy?" Lily's voice carried to the paramedics waiting below. One of them stepped forward, concern etched across her face. "Little girl, do you need medical attention?" she asked gently, reaching a hand toward Lily's forehead to check for fever. Victoria straightened her posture, unwavering. "We're fine," she said softly. "Just a bit shaken, but we're okay." The paramedic nodded and stepped back into formation, realizing this family's strength was evident in Lily's calm trust. Behind Ryan, Captain Rodriguez and the first officer watched as passengers disembarked, offering a silent salute to the man whose grit had carried them safely to ground. Rodriguez approached Ryan, respect plain in his eyes. "I've flown dangerous missions," he said quietly, "but nothing demands more precision than a dead stick approach." Ryan shrugged, humility mingling with exhaustion. "This time it wasn't about precision," he said, voice low. "It was about the promise I made to Lily." He turned, brushing Lily's curls from her forehead as she tucked her chin into his neck. "And I always keep my promises." At the bottom of the ramp, reporters shouted questions. Cameras zoomed in on the glossy sheen of sweat on his brow, and scribbles of notepads begged for headlines. But Victoria stood like a statue, arm outstretched, a red ink "no comment" scrawled across her eyes. The first reporter, a young man chasing clicks, sputtered out into the night, while the rest hesitated, sensing that this moment was not theirs to seize. A firefighter offered Ryan his hand to descend the final steps. "Glad you're all right, Captain," he said in the quiet aftermath. "We've seen a lot of landings. This one was special." Ryan accepted the hand and stepped onto the tarmac, feeling the cool asphalt beneath his boots. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, drawing in the night air as though it were a baptism, the smell of engine exhaust, wet pavement, and freedom. One by one, passengers made their way down the ramp. Some embraced by loved ones waiting beyond the barricade, others leaning on strangers for support. Each connection, the handshake, the tearful hug, the whispered thank you became a testament to what had happened in the air, a cabin transformed by faith, unity, and a man's unwavering determination. At the base of the stairs, Lily slid from Ryan's arms and toddled toward the waiting crowd. Small hands were outstretched, policemen offering candy, flight attendants offering tissues, reporters holding phones, but Lily paused only for Victoria's arms diving back into her lap. Victoria rocked her gently, murmuring, "You were so brave, baby." Lily looked up at her father. "Can we go home now?" she asked, voice both weary and triumphant. Ryan laughed softly, brushing a finger across her nose. "Home," he promised. "We'll go home." A hush fell across the tarmac as Ryan turned to face the assembled passengers and crews. He raised a hand not in military salute, but in simple acknowledgement. The hush shifted into a hum of applause, growing until it echoed off the hangar doors and filled the night air. For a heartbeat, there were no reporters, no cameras, just people lifting their voices in gratitude. Victoria stepped to Ryan's side, placing a gentle hand on his back. "You brought them home alive," she said. "That makes you more than a pilot. You're an unexpected hero." Ryan's gaze lingered on the rescue crews, the firefighters, the paramedics, even the ground handlers standing by. The real miracle, he said quietly, happened inside that cabin, when strangers clasped hands and trusted each other. He looked down at Lily, whose small head rested against Victoria's shoulder, and then back at Victoria, whose eyes glistened in the floodlight's glare. In that glowing tableau, Ryan saw the sum of every act of kindness that had carried them through the night. The father's sacrifice, the CEO's shield, the grandfather's steady prayer, the mother's gentle lullaby. A nearby policeman stepped forward, offering Ryan his badge, in deferent tribute, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. Ryan shook his head, refusing the token. "Keep it," he said. "It belongs to every one of us who shared this flight." As the crowd parted, rescue vehicles pulled away and the hangar doors creaked into motion. Ryan Carter, Lily, and Victoria moved toward the waiting cars. The night sky above them shivered with possibility, as though acknowledging that the bonds forged at 30,000 feet would endure long after the engines roared back to life. Lily tugged at Ryan's pant leg. "Daddy?" she asked in a small voice. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" He smiled, ruffling her curls. "Pancakes it is." Victoria slipped an arm through his. "And maybe next time," she said, "we'll ride first class." Ryan laughed, a deep, unguarded sound that carried through the now empty tarmac like a benediction. "Only if you promise to keep me out of the headlines." Victoria grinned. "I promise." Together they climbed into the waiting SUV, an unremarkable vehicle compared to the extraordinary flight they'd survived. As the doors closed and the headlights pulsed into the night, the world watched the unexpected hero, the little girl with unbreakable trust, and the woman who refused to let his courage be exploited. And in that quiet triumph, they all understood true heroism is not born from perfect credentials or flawless records, but from the willingness to step into uncertainty and carry others safely home. The morning sun slanted through Ryan Carter's kitchen window in soft golden beams, painting the scratched Formica countertop with promise. He'd been sipping his coffee black, no sugar, the way he liked it. When the mail arrived, a crisp official envelope stamped United States Air Force. He frowned, setting his mug aside. He hadn't expected anything more than the usual bills and takeout menus since Flight 729's miraculous landing weeks ago. Yet there it was, addressed in precise block letters to Mr. Ryan Carter. Reinstatement. His heart thumped in his chest as he slit the envelope open, careful not to tear the stationery. Inside a single sheet bearing the emblem of the 139th Airlift Wing, detailed Colonel Sarah Hayes' offer. The Air Force was prepared to reinstate him as a C-130 instructor. The letter praised his impeccable judgment under crisis and the grace with which he'd guided a powerless airliner to safety. It concluded with an open-ended invitation. The runway was ready whenever he chose to return. Ryan sat back in his chair, eyes misting as he reread the words. 10 years ago, he'd walked away from military service tired, disillusioned, certain he'd left the sky behind for good. He'd traded flight suits for grease-stained coveralls, teaching himself to fix cars rather than pilots, focusing on keeping his daughter Lily grounded rather than airborne. Yet here it was a second chance written in ink and ceremony, reminding him that the sky still held his name. He thought of Lily humming a melody in her room down the hall, a tune she'd made up after listening to the engines die. Her laughter had buoyed him through that powerless descent, and her quiet faith in him had lifted him above every doubt. Now he would need to tell her that the world expected him back in the cockpit. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket, rising to pour himself another cup of coffee he wouldn't drink until he spoke with his daughter. Across town, Victoria Blake surveyed the brightly lit conference room at Hearth Haven Community Center, where rows of tiny workbenches had been set up for tonight's launch of the Lily Flight Lab. Model airplane kits lay unassembled on each bench. Balsa wood wings, rubber band motors, simple tools engraved with the program's name in Victoria's sleek corporate font. Volunteers in green aprons moved briskly, adjusting overhead string lights and festive banners that fluttered like wingtips in the summer breeze. Victoria took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her blouse as she prepared to address the gathered family's underprivileged kids from every corner of the neighborhood, accompanied by parents, guardians, and teachers. She recalled the hullabaloo of media attention that had followed Flight 729's landing headlines that had painted her as a corporate magnate turned reluctant hero one scandal away from irrelevance. Tonight she intended to reclaim her story, to channel that attention into something enduring, a spark of hope for children who might never otherwise glimpse the freedom of flight. At 6:00 p.m., sharp Victoria stepped onto a makeshift stage, a simple riser adorned with the Lily Flight Lab logo. She tapped the microphone console. The chatter in the room subsided, replaced by eager anticipation. A young boy in the front row fiddled with a chunk of balsa wood while his sister traced the lab's name in colorful cursive on her palm. "Good evening, everyone." Victoria began, her voice warm but steady. "Welcome to the first session of Lily Flight Lab." She paused to allow smiles to spread. "This program is dedicated to my daughter Lily, who inspired me to remember what it feels like when you believe in someone's wings before they even know they have them." At the mention of Lily's name, a ripple of excitement went through the children. "We're not here to write resumes," Victoria continued, glancing at the eager faces. "We're here to build dreams one wing at a time." She walked among the benches, lifting up a completed model from the volunteers table. "These airplanes may be small, but they carry big ideas, persistence, creativity, teamwork. And just like any real airplane, they need a good pilot, and that's you." A hush fell as she invited the children to choose their kits. Tiny hands darted forward and the room buzzed with activity. Victoria moved off stage to a side table where Ryan stood waiting, letter in hand. He'd arrived early, cheeks flushed with the same excitement that gripped the kids. The scent of fresh-cut wood and paint hovered in the air. Above them, a mural of hot air balloons drifted across the ceiling, each balloon bearing a painted heart. "Ready?" Victoria asked, offering him her arm. He smiled, nodding, and together they stepped into the current of eager energy. Ryan knelt beside a bench where Lily and two new friends were puzzling over a kit's instructions. He unfolded the letter and placed it on the table as a silent testament to the day's promise. Dad, Lily squealed, tossing her goggles onto his head. She wore her pilot's scarf, hand-me-down from the flight attendant who'd served as Ryan's makeshift co-pilot during landing. "Let's build ours first." She dove into the balsa strips, her small fingers guiding them like practiced hands. Ryan watched, her pride swelling. He opened the letter, face up, and Victoria leaned over to read the colonel's signature. "Well," she said softly, "it looks like the Air Force wants you back." He dropped a wing spar into place and looked up. "I got their offer," he said, voice quiet. "I don't know what to do." His gaze flicked to Lily, shaping wood with the same focus he'd once used to shape flight plans. "She's happy here. We're happy here." Victoria nodded, understanding. "You have that second chance," she said. "But you also have this chance." She gestured around the room, the laughter, the teamwork, the simple joy of flight model assembly. "We're giving kids a shot they'd never get otherwise. You're doing that right now." Ryan exhaled. He traced the colonel's signature with a fingertip, then folded the letter slowly. "I never thought I'd see another flight suit," he admitted. "But maybe I can do both." His eyes found Lily's as she coaxed a rubber band motor into place. I want to teach again, he said, half to himself, half to the universe. But I also want to build this program with you. Victoria smiled, her pulse quickening at the prospect. We can make that happen, she promised. You'll be our chief flight instructor here too. Imagine after-school sessions led by the man who saved Flight 729. She winked, and a few parents overheard exchanging glances of eager approval. Lily looked up at the two of them, crayon hearts gleaming in her notebook beside the letter. Can I learn to fly real planes, Daddy? She asked, hope shining in her eyes. Ryan reached for her hand, brushing his thumb over hers. In time, Bug. In time. Over the next hour, families teamed up to craft tiny fuselages and wings, guided by Ryan's steady encouragement and Victoria's organizational flair. He showed them how to test the rubber band motor's tension, how to balance the wing's center of gravity, and how with a gentle flick the model plane could soar across the high beams. Victoria circulated, offering high fives and applause, for each maiden flight her laughter a bright chord in the symphony of sawdust and excitement. As the session wound down, Ryan and Victoria stood back to back amid a constellation of completed airplanes perched along the windowsill. Each model was a story, a child's first attempt at aerodynamics, a parent's patient guidance, a volunteer's steady hand. Together they had built more than planes, they had built a community. Victoria rested her hand on Ryan's shoulder. Second chances, she said softly. Sometimes they come in a letter. Sometimes they come in the hands of children. Ryan nodded, his gaze lingering on the planes glinting in the late afternoon light. I never believed I'd get to do both again, he said. Flying and teaching. And now, you've built a runway for me right here. They smiled side by side in that bustling, hopeful room, knowing that their partnership, born of crisis at 30,000 feet, had transformed into a promise on the ground. A promise that every child could learn to build wings and every pilot could find a home where second chances were always ready for takeoff. The spring air held a gentle warmth tinged with the promise of fresh beginnings as a gathering formed beneath the broad canopy of a newly built hangar-shaped pavilion at Hearthaven's back lawn. A banner stretched between two poles, its bronze letters glinting in the morning sun, Lily Flight Lab. Beneath it, a polished bronze plaque had just been unveiled, its inscription radiating quiet gravitas, built on courage. Powered by connection. Ryan Carter stood to the left, crisp in his return-to-service flight suit, edges of insignia, freshly pressed sleeves adorned not just with rank, but with the quiet confidence of a man who had rediscovered his purpose. To his right, Victoria Blake wore a tailored blazer in soft spring green, her smile reflecting both the grace of leadership reclaimed and the warmth of a heart healed by shared mission. For over a year, what had begun as a small workshop with 6 model kits had blossomed into a full-fledged engineering and flight education center serving hundreds of underprivileged children each month. The pavilion behind them rang with laughter and the hum of conversations as volunteers in matching smocks guided tiny hands in constructing paper and balsa airplanes, calibrating rubber band motors, and testing gliders beneath the wide eaves. Everywhere the spirit of Flight 729's miracle landing fluttered in the air, carried on the wings of possibility. As the last drape fell from the plaque, Victoria reached forward, brushing a hand across its gleam. Every letter in this plaque, she said, voice rich with emotion, is a testament to what can happen when faith meets courage and when a community chooses to lift each other skyward. She stepped back, allowing Ryan to speak. He inhaled deeply, glancing down at Lily, now nearly 7, perched on a podium step beside him. Lily wore her flight goggles pushed up into her curls, her wide eyes scanning the smiling faces of children, parents, and neighbors gathered to celebrate. In her hand, she held a paper glider bright white with her name written in bold letters, and she stood ready to release it into the warm breeze. Ryan's voice rang out over the quiet murmur. When I first sat in that disabled cockpit, he began cupping his hand around the microphone. I was a man who thought he'd left his past behind, an ex-Air Guard instructor turned mechanic, certain that Earth was the only home I'd ever know. But one flight changed everything. A powerless glide brought me to the realization that some missions don't end at touchdown, they begin there. A collective murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Ryan smiled at Lily, who beamed back, her small fists clenched with excitement. This lab, he continued, is our shared runway, a place where every child can learn to build wings and discover that courage is the engine that carries us beyond our fears. He paused, his gaze drifting to Victoria. And none of this would exist without a partner who refused to let headlines define her, he said. Victoria, thank you for believing that a community spirit could soar if only we gave it the chance. Victoria's eyes misted. She placed a hand over her heart before addressing the crowd once more. We launched Lily Flight Lab with humble hopes, not knowing if it would last a month or a decade, she said. But you parents, volunteers, neighbors showed up week after week, not just to assemble model planes, but to build faith in each other. Today we celebrate not a ribbon cutting, but a door opening to every dream this community holds. At her cue, a row of uniformed volunteers stepped forward, each holding a freshly built paper glider decorated by local children. The glider's designs ranged from bright stripes to hand-drawn stars and hearts, a kaleidoscope of youthful imagination. Lily climbed to the platform's highest step, holding her own plane aloft, and with a collective cheer from the crowd, she released it into the air. The first glider caught a gentle thermal current drifting lazily under the pavilion's eaves before skimming beyond the audience, a white silhouette against the blue sky. Then another glider soared, a vibrant orange craft engineered by an 8-year-old who beamed as she watched her creation catch the wind. One by one, dozens of planes lifted in unison their glides, weaving through the air like a flock of colorful birds embarking on an impossible journey. Lily laughed, clapping her hands in delight as her father swept her into his arms. Ryan turned with her, sweeping his other arm around Victoria so that the three stood like the living embodiment of the plaque's promise. In that luminous moment, the pavilion felt less like a building and more like a vessel of shared aspiration buoyed by every dream that had taken flight within its walls. As the applause softened into delighted chatter, Ryan guided Lily down the steps. A group of aspiring young engineers pressed close, notebooks in hand. Captain Carter, one girl called, "How do you make sure the wings don't break?" Ryan knelt beside her, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "Balance," he explained gently. "Distribute the weight evenly and make sure your rubber band motor isn't too tight. Then trust the glide." He winked and the girl rushed back to her bench pencils, dancing across the page as she sketched design notes. Nearby, Victoria greeted parents whose children had found new hopes here, an 11-year-old with learning differences now proud to show off a meticulously built glider. A teen who had never imagined a college scholarship now chatting excitedly about aerodynamics. A single mother who'd come merely to volunteer and had discovered a renewed sense of purpose. Victoria found herself beside Marisol, a volunteer teacher. "Look at what's happening," Marisol whispered, gesturing at the swirling gliders. "It's like they're not just flying through air, they're flying through doubt, fear, everything that held them down." Victoria nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "And they'll carry that with them," she replied, "long after the planes land." As the sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in brushstrokes of rose and gold, Ryan and Victoria walked to the pavilion's edge. Behind them, the center's new community garden thrived with spring blooms, another testament to growth born of compassion. Children chased gliders in the grass, their laughter echoing against the evening sky. Ryan tilted his head toward Victoria. "You think he's ready?" he asked, indicating Lily, who now hopped alongside her friends. Victoria smiled, tugging gently on Lily's hand. "He's always been ready," she said. "He just needed a reason." He glanced at the plaque one last time, built on courage, powered by connection. He exhaled, a quiet laugh escaping. "We did that," he said, voice thick with emotion. Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder. "No," she countered. "They did. Every child, every volunteer, every parent. We just opened the door." They stood together, two figures bound by extraordinary circumstances, watching the next generation of flyers claim the sky as their own. Beyond the pavilion, a single plane cruised overhead, an ordinary commuter flight engines humming, unaware of the lives it contrasted with. Yet for Ryan and Victoria, that distant roar was less a sound of routine travel and more a reminder of every heartbeat that had carried them here. When Lily ran back, brandishing yet another glider adorned with rainbow stripes, Ryan ruffled her hair. "You did it, kiddo," he said. Lily laughed, tossing the plane skyward. "We did it, Daddy." Victoria joined them, arms linking as the glider arced high into the twilight. In its graceful flight, they all saw their reflection, a community lifted on wings of courage and connection, bound for horizons they'd only just begun to explore. And in that moment, beneath the warm glow of the setting sun and the ever-watchful eyes of the bronze plaque, Ryan Carter and Victoria Blake knew they had not only landed a plane and saved a cabin, but had charted a new course for every spirit yet to soar. The future was theirs to build one wing at a time.